Welcome to Rapture Recovery, Big Book Step Study, Program of Action. This week we are going to focus on Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. That reading starts on page 84 at the paragraph. This thought brings us to Step 10, and it goes all the way to the bottom of that next page where you see the paragraph that starts with step 11. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to highlight, you're going to want to circle any relating points, you're going to want to write out in the margin. This is doing action work, so when you show up to a meeting that is based on Step 10, you have some experience, strength, and hope. You have some knowledge of the literature that's being shared, and it's going to build your confidence up to be the sobriety soldier that you're on the journey of becoming. We are on a healing journey in recovery. You have done so much amazing work. What we're going to do is review where we've been, because I just told you where we're going. We started off in the preface, and we talked about the consistency of the program. Then in the foreword to the first edition, we talked about our anonymity and why it is our prized possession. Now, going through steps 8 and 9 last week and making commitments to make amends and doing what you can, God will meet you where you are. All of a sudden, you're seeing why anonymity is our prized possession. We did a gratitude list on our past spiritual experience so we could take those gratitudes with us into our current spiritual program. In the foreword to the second edition, they gave us all kinds of very valuable information to validate all the resources that they've used. They used the Oxford groups. They used Dr. Silkworth for the doctor's opinion, and we have some validity of who this man was. He was an expert in alcoholism. They talk about the power of one alcoholic helping another. They tell us also this book was written by 100 people, and 96 believed to be men and 4 to be women. And then they also used this edition to bring the traditions into it because they were needing to manage the fellowship and put principles before personalities. In the foreword to the third edition, we are celebrating the rise of women. By this point, I pray that you're doing this with women. I pray that you have found some fellowship in other women meetings. In the foreword to the fourth edition, we talked about technology, and that's where we are right now. Then we went over to the doctor's opinion. We validated his opinion. We did our own drink inventory, which our entire program is based off of, because this is your journey. This is a spiritual healing journey to your drinking inventory. Then we went over to Bill's story, and this is the first experience, strength, and hope through this big book and also through the fellowship. We talk about Ebby Thatcher, how God will pretty much use anybody's 24 hours of sobriety, no matter what it looks like in the end. We did a friends inventory that was kind of setting us up for our fourth step. We did an unmanageability chart, again, more pre-work for our fourth step to really look at facts over feelings. Then we get into there is a solution. They're giving us the outlines, and we're giving you suggestions on meetings to find that you're going to have to prioritize your sobriety. It's got to come first. Then we went in, because just in case we didn't get it, we needed more about alcoholism. We talked about different kinds of alcoholics, different kinds of alcoholic drinking. God is doing for us what we can't do for ourselves, and He's prepping us up to your story may not align perfectly with a newcomer, but at least we have some knowledge of where they may be. When do we experience the obsession of the mind thinking? We also did a little fun inventory of the 5 worst things that we did in order to do some pre-work, just so we understand that there's a reason we need to be in our sober environment. And that wrapped up our step 1. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Then we jumped into step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We went into we agnostics, where we made a gratitude list on God. And then we also referred to the bedevilments, all the problems that we're having in our life without God. And then the paragraph underneath it, it tells us how God can be a solution. And you are surrounded by a fellowship that has worked this program, and they are all living examples of the solution. Then we moved over into step 3. made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood them. How do we do that? We do that through the third step prayer. We offer ourselves our difficulties. We agree that we're going to be a witness of a solution of this 12 steps to other people who are coming into this program, and we are going to rely on His will and not our will. That wrapped up section 1. So then we went into our section 2, where we're going to use every single right brain activity we did in that section 1 in the section 2. So we went over into our 4th step. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We did this in a notebook. We used these printouts, whatever worked best for us. We also, in this workbook, did a little review, used a lot of different techniques that I've gained through other Big Book step studies to evaluate, look for patterns, see what things would have looked like if we would have been spiritually fit, if we would have invited God into it. We sat down and really reviewed what some of our fears were, and we also created what a future ideal would look like for us. Then we went over into action, which in the literature, that's step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We reviewed our 4-step inventory. We found someone to do it with us. We scheduled that. We had some fellowship time. We had some Me Too moments. No matter what that looked like, if it was your first time or your 10th time, there was a connection of spirits. Then we went to step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character in order to access our right brain. We have an activity chart here of trying to, do a seek and find of our character defects, because we don't even really understand what they are, how they play out in our 24 hours. We reached out to people in the program asking for their experience, strength, and hope. Then we went to another prayer step, which is step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. So then we spent some time in the 7th step week, and we did those prayers. We saw what the results were. We saw God working in our 24 hours. Then last week we were in step 8 and 9, made a list of all the persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Then we also spent some time making these amends. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I gave you guys some experience, strength, and hope on some of my experiences in that. So over the past couple of weeks, we have completed the first 2 sections of this workbook. We're going to be entering into the 3rd section, and this is going to be our living steps, our step 10 through 12. These are things that you never graduate from. This is the design of living. Once you've cleaned up the wreckage of your past, now we need to know what to do. What do we do now not to create more wreckage? And we are going to be sitting in our step 10 this week. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. And so if we go over to this reading, we are going to have some discussion points here. So that's on 84. This thought brings us to step 10. And one of the things that we're admitting right now, and this is a discussion point, is we cease fighting anything or anyone. So how exactly do we do that? We put this at the forefront of our mind. We are going to be taking a daily inventory because it is going to give us a daily reprieve. On page 85, at the end of that first paragraph, that is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So how are we going to keep in fit spiritual condition? If you look down at your workbook page, you're going to see an activity here that is really going to catapult you into reaching out to other people in the program. This week, you may want to seek out a 10-step meeting that's happening in person, or you may want to do some research on the internet about 10 steps in our program. There are plenty of apps out there that actually have 10-step activities. The ones I have found are pretty extensive, which is a good thing. But if you're currently working with your partner, you can spend this entire week doing 10 steps together. I know, doesn't that sound like fun? What? Some 24-hour accountability? Yeah, that sounds like fun. God's doing for you what you can't do for yourself. This is probably going to be a hard week for people who have challenges with time management. So what you need to do is you need to look at your 24 hours. No, it does say in here when we retire at night, but again, you can live in a 10th step all day long. There's no reason when something happens, you have to wait till nighttime to think about it and process it or use the tools of this program. Whenever you get agitated, remember we started this process of looking for our agitated spirit in our step 6, and here we are in step 10. Where are we selfish, dishonest, resentful, or fearful? Okay, so at the end of our day, we ask ourselves, was there ever a time where I was not serene? If so, was I selfish? Was I not getting something exactly when I wanted and how I wanted it? Was I dishonest? Had I put an expectation on a person, place, or a thing? Was I resentful, right, towards someone or some place? Was I sitting in fear that God was not going to provide for me? Was I not fully relying upon my higher power to deliver my small needs as well as my big needs? So whenever you find these things and they come up, you want to pause, ponder, and pray. And so when I did this activity, I wrote down, and you can print this out multiple times. Again, you can go find the app if you need to find the app. In this triangle, I wrote, allow myself to process all my feelings, digging deep to think of what patterns are creating these. So in this week, you're going to be looking for patterns. Go back to those questions that we used to review our 4th step before we did our 5th step. What would these things look like if I would invite God into the situation? Because most of the times we are a self-will run riot. Most of the times when we're agitated and not in spiritual fit condition, we are operating under our will and not our higher powers will. We're not asking ourselves, what can I do for others, right? So that was my top triangle. When I paused, prayed, and pondered, I wrote this in the other triangle. God's building up my confidence in everything, because everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. God is everything or God is nothing. So a lot of times I'm looking at people, places, circumstances, and I'm expecting a certain result, but that's my will. How do I find God's will? God is sometimes shutting doors, what do they say, to open windows. He's protecting you. People's rejection is God's protection. And so sometimes in order to physically move us out of bad thought patterns, God has to move us into positive thought patterns. And when we start looking at His will instead of our will, your entire thought process will change. So here's just one of my experience, strength, and hope. One time I was supposed to meet a fellowship member for coffee. It was somebody I really liked in the program. She had more time than I did. It seemed like her life was together. Her marriage was together. She drove a decent car. She had nice kids. So it was a Saturday. I have 3 young kids and a husband. So in order to make a Saturday date, that is going to an extreme measure to try to manage my life. But I know that I have to make sobriety a priority. So I set this up. I end up at our meeting spot, and she totally does not show. Now, this is an early sobriety, so I am very irritable. I'm being selfish because I think that she's supposed to stand up to her commitment. I'm being dishonest because whatever was actually going to happen at the coffee, I was putting it in an angelical view, like it was going to be spiritual. I was resentful because I felt like she wasn't making me a priority and didn't care about my life and probably was just sleeping in. And I was fearful that if this girl won't meet me, nobody will meet me, right? And so I had to kind of sit in that for a little bit and understand that God had something else for me in that moment. So I'm sitting in the parking lot, and it is challenging for me to get to live meetings with these 3 young kids on the weekends. And God just told me, why don't you go to a live meeting? And so I looked up on my phone where a live meeting was, and it said it was about 12 miles away. So I got in my car, I drove the 12 miles, and I show up in a parking lot, and I get out of my car, and there is someone just pacing the parking lot. And this is a newcomer that is nervous to go into the meeting. So I ask them, are you looking for the meeting? And they start crying, and I'm like, okay, it's okay. I've been where you are. Let's walk in together. And I got to walk her into that meeting. Now, are you telling me that that was God's purpose on that Saturday morning, was for me to be in that parking lot at that exact time to walk this girl into this meeting. So I sit down in the meeting, and I've got the newcomer on my right, and there's another girl on my left who is wearing a t-shirt of a sprint triathlon that I had done in the past. So God's giving me a connecting moment here again. So I look to my left, and I'm like, oh, I did that. And so we start talking about it. And then she tells me that she was so nervous to come to this meeting because she had just relapsed and she had a decent time of sobriety, and all of her friends are mad at her for relapsing, which anyone who works a good program knows that that is not the truth. Remember, we talked about Ebby Thatcher. Anybody's 24 hours of sobriety is used by God no matter how many days it's consistent. So, but she's sitting in Pity City, and that's okay. And it gave me an opportunity to be like, well, I'm sober and I'm going to be your friend. Let's get to be Facebook friends. Let's look at doing a bike ride together, because she obviously trains for triathlons. And that was a Me Too moment. God wanted me sitting in between those two women on that Saturday morning. He did not want me in the coffee shop, but I was looking for His will. That was His will. And that is a testimony. That is an experience, strength, and hope of a day that I showed up to take, but God allowed me to give. And when the girl called me that stood me up, instead of being resentful, instead of being selfish, instead of sitting in fear, instead of getting mad at her and doing like a 2-week, I'm not going to pick your phone call up, I picked that phone up and I thanked her. I thanked her for not showing up. I said, thank you for not coming. Let me tell you what God did in my life. Thank you. Don't feel bad about this at all. I love you, and I'll see you in 2 days. And we rescheduled. And that was the end of it. That's what two people working good programs in our fellowship looks like. We are not witch hunters. We are here to support people. We are human. We are going to make mistakes, but we are in a program of forgiveness. We love. Remember, if we go back to the third step, we operate on thy power and thy love, not our own. So this week, take some time to find a time that you can text or call the person or the people that you may want to do a group text if you're doing this in a group environment, or however, email, whatever. So you guys can come together and actually do 10 steps. And I'll tell you, with 6 years in sobriety, this isn't something that's consistent, right? And this is how people end up needing to do full 4 steps again, because they weren't doing their 10 steps. I had somebody in the program tell me that. I was like, I think I need to do another 4 step. And they're like, you're not doing your 10 steps. Don't make such a big deal about it. Pick up the phone and tell somebody in the program, what your resentment is. Tell them what the source of it is. Tell them where you're being dishonest and be done with it, and go work with some other newcomers. Don't sit here for a month and do another 4th step. Serve. Service is the key to your sobriety, not self-pity. And that's all that is self-pity. It's excuses. Go. There's a song, it's called Go and Sin No More, and I think about that all the time. That's what God wants us to do. He wants us to share our struggles so we can help each other in sobriety. So thanks.